Hello, Geekscapists. Welcome to a brand new Geekscape episode. And this one is a special. We're going to be talking all about Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, the new MCU release, starring Simu Lu and a whole cast of amazing actors who, I mean, what can you say? Michelle Yeoh and Tony Leung, like, they're legends, and they're in this movie. So we're going to be talking a lot about how this movie fits in with the MCU. We're going to be breaking it all down. There will be tons of spoilers. So if you've not seen the new Shang-Chi movie, please, wait a little bit and then come back to this episode in the feed and listen to it, because we got Ian Kerner coming up, and he likes to get into the nitty-gritty on where these characters came from in the comics, what this means for the rest of the MCU, how it all ties together, and of course what the movie, how the movie is in itself. And so there's going to be lots and lots of spoilers, but this is the Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings Comic-Con. Comic-Con, I don't know. It's on my brain. Let's go to Comic-Con. Geekscape Special. I did get an email about Comic-Con and whether or not I wanted to exhibit at the mini Comic-Con going on here in late November, early December. I think it's late November. I don't know yet. I don't know what we're going to do for that. But we'll definitely be at LA Comic-Con here in LA. They're partners of ours, so we love them. So that'll be going down. So anyway, we're going to be talking Shang-Chi right now. It's not your typical Geekscape. If you want a typical Geekscape, go back in the feed. There's lots of cool stuff going on. We had a great episode last week. And then on this past Friday, my friend Nick Scanner and I sat down and talked about his brand new movie that premieres this week on Vice TV. It's it's the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and this is an okay way to kind of remember it. He has this movie called Too Soon, Comedy After 9/11, and it will really take you back. And it's an interesting documentary. They interview comedians about when they, the whole atmosphere of doing comedy and levity after 9/11. So that's in the feed. There's lots of cool stuff in the feed. That's what I'm telling you. I hope you all are having a good Labor Day weekend. But if you have not seen Shang-Chi yet, this is your last warning. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty now. So cool. The comments are open. We're live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch. Y'all are a part of the show, so drop the questions for Ian if you're watching this, if you've seen the movie. And obviously, while you're enjoying this, share the episode with your friends. We're available on all of the podcast apps, and we're totally free. So there's a little bit of incentive. All right, Ian, get in here. Let's talk Shang-Chi, buddy. How are you, man? You been all right?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. Here, move your camera a little bit to give you a little bit more headroom. You kind of yeah. There you go. I like to see the top of your head. Yeah, it's all right. Yeah. Cool. Okay, so Ian, this was definitely the movie to see with Ian, and because of circumstances moving back and forth, I did not see this movie with Ian.
We saw it simultaneously.
We saw it simultaneously in different theaters, but this is not. Damn, man. This is definitely a movie that I many times turned to enthusiastically say something, and I had to deal with just saying it to Justin, who was like, he just kind of nods. Justin's been on the show before. Yeah. He's great, but you know what? There's a level of excitement going to see a Marvel movie with Ian.
I usually see them at least with Justin, if not always with you, but with Justin. Yeah. And so I mean, he just, just.
Yeah, you're like, hey, what'd you think of this? He just nods.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I look over at you during these movies, and there's just this shit-eating grin on your face, because these characters have been with you for 40 years, and you've loved all of them. And you're very familiar with them. You know what I mean? Like, this is a character that you're familiar with.
Yeah, I want to say that Shang-Chi is one of the characters in Marvel I would say I'm still very familiar, but one of my least familiar, because whereas I've read most Marvel comics, I mean literally most, but Master of Kung Fu I only read some of. Mm-hmm. When you get to Shang-Chi appearances after that, probably all of.
Yes,
but in the whatever 125 issues or whatever it is of Master of Kung Fu, I didn't read that many of those. I wasn't buying that in the 70s.
Those are 70s going into the 80s before before the Chris Claremont stuff really started taking off, and X-Men was the book at Marvel. I've been telling people, because they ask about Shang-Chi, and they're really, as we get into this, the movie that we watched, like there isn't really a definitive storyline for Shang-Chi that he can lean on. Like, and I think that Marvel's going to start hitting that with this phase with the Eternals. And they faced that with the Guardians, where Guardians of the Galaxy came out kind of as a surprise because there wasn't that definitive Guardians of the Galaxy run that you could turn to for iconic storylines.
In point of fact, the thing about the Guardians, not to get on too much of a tangent, but they really sprung out of a big cosmic event, and then interestingly, they decided to start the whole cosmic stuff with Guardians. Mm-hmm. So so there was really no way to do that way. Here's the thing that this movie did do well, and when I say I'm not as familiar, I mean it doesn't mean I don't know Shang-Chi fairly well. But I don't know that I can do as many deep dives on it. But as you said, the movie does maintain a lot of the origin stuff. So in the comics, there's a character in literature, Fu Manchu. Mm-hmm. And way back when they created Shang-Chi, Marvel, I believe they had a license because eventually they didn't. But they used Fu Manchu and said Fu Manchu was this notorious crime lord who was Shang-Chi's father. Then in later years, they couldn't reference Fu Manchu anymore. So they, for a while, they just didn't say his name and they've come up with different names. So they've just moved around with that over the years. I will say in the last couple of years, there have been a couple of Shang-Chi series that have been actually really good, and I highly recommend them. And they've built up their own mythology. I personally think they added more to Shang-Chi's mythology than there ever was before.
Well, yeah, I mean, post Bendis putting him in as part of the Avengers, it seemed like about 10, 15 years ago, when Bendis had the whole new Avengers storyline, and he was putting Wolverine and Spider-Man into the Avengers and making Avengers the premier
and
Marvel book. He put Luke Cage in there, and Shang-Chi ended up on the team. It was he had trained Spider-Man in hand-to-hand combat and stuff. In Spider-Fu, right? Yeah. And so I feel like post that Avengers appearance or presence for Shang-Chi, there was an investment in getting him more of the limelight on the page. And the only consistent storyline I could find was really just that continued theme of his father being a crime boss and Shang-Chi not having it.
And his father's been dead in the comics for a very long time now. Mm-hmm. But yes, for the longest time, it was that his father wanted him to be, with him and work with him, and Shang-Chi was working against him. And sometimes he worked with MI6 and, what have you, because it was, of course, it was a European crime ring and all that. So, going into the deep dive, and for anyone that didn't watch the Marvel Legends on Shang-Chi and all that, and I mean, I'm sure there are some people that, maybe don't pay attention quite as much, and maybe that's part of the reason why people would listen to something, watch something like this. But, back in the very first Iron Man movie, you had this reference to the 10 rings, which there was a character, the Mandarin in the comics, who was a very classic old school Iron Man villain, who had these 10 rings that he wore on his fingers. They were McLuhan rings. They came from an alien race. And eventually you found out that predating all the Marvel superhero stuff is a character, Fin Fang Foom, who was actually a dragon, a big monster. Because a lot of Marvel comics before Fantastic Four #1 were just monster comics.
Yeah, and that's where Groot and the Hulk and all these different characters originated. Well, not the Hulk, but the first absolutely, Hulk. Yeah, the first Hulk.
Yeah, but anyway, yes. But Groot came from there. A lot of random characters like that were there, and they incorporated them into the superhero comics. So Fin Fang Foom and he basically presents as a dragon. So, which has been interesting, but he's actually, a member of an alien race. And so these rings are ancient, and they do each ring give a different power. So heat ray, a freeze ray, a concussive ray, all kinds of different things. So, and then on top of that, the Mandarin was descended from Genghis Khan. So his whole thing was to conquer, the way his ancestor had. And he was an incredible martial artist and all those things. So in the first Iron Man movie, the 10 rings, you saw that as a reference. And I was like, okay, exciting. Are we going to get the Mandarin? So with Iron Man 3, and I mean, way back, when we did the show on Iron Man 3, I mean, I said very definitively that, most comic fans were actually really offended by Iron Man 3. It was sort of a fuck you. They teased the Mandarin, and then to say the Mandarin was this made up thing was really a kick in the balls. It was like, oh yeah, it's just a silly thing we made up. So when they did the Marvel one-shot All Hail the King, which literally just last week they finally put up on Disney Plus, that was on the Blu-ray of was it The Dark World?
I thought it was on the Iron Man 3 Blu-ray, but you're saying okay.
I'm pretty sure it was not on the Iron Man 3 one.
Then it was probably on Dark World as being like the next release.
Yeah, it was on a later release. It should have been on Iron Man 3. And basically, the point of All Hail the King is to say, okay, yeah, we said he wasn't real. Actually, he is real. And they set up this great thing. And we've waited now many years for the real. The Mandarin is real. Travis Slattery, Ben Kingsley from Iron Man 3, who's the main character in All Hail the King, is taken by him because he's meant to meet him. And I got to say, I'm jumping right into this now. I loved and was thrilled. I thought maybe we get a cameo. He was, an integral part of this movie. And he was great.
Yes. And I am all for the dunking in like revisionism of Iron Man 3. Because I was one of those fans who was like, not so much that you disrespected the comics, but you just missed a really good narrative opportunity in not giving us a proper Mandarin. But here with Tony Leung, you give us the proper Mandarin. And obviously, if you've seen In the Mood for Love or any other Tony Leung performance, the guy just owns every scene that he's in, and he does so in this movie.
And the whole backstory in this movie totally gives us the explanation we needed, that he was around. Absolutely. He was around for 1,000 years. But he was basically retired because he had a family, so he was gone for a while.
And when you have that scene in this film, and we're going to talk about, I'd like to talk about the pacing in this movie, because this is a movie I really, really enjoyed, but I definitely had parts where the momentum shifted for me, and I did not enjoy the second half of this film as much as I enjoyed the first half of this film. The first half of this movie really works for me. I mean, that the bamboo fight is one of the greatest things I've seen in a Marvel movie. I think that is such a phenomenal scene.
There's all the fight scenes are just
some incredible, spectacular
my
stuff.
Who's not really usually into the action stuff, but because this was that balletic, Chinese, cinema influenced up. The bus was just fantastic. The
opening scene where he is, he meets his match and falls in love. I thought that was such an incredible scene. I was less into the Warriors of Zoo Mountain type stuff at the end of the movie, although that definitely has its place in martial arts cinema and it belongs here. Absolutely. And I get it. I feel like by the time we got halfway through the movie, there was a lot of exposition in those scenes in the Mandarin's compound, and there were also a lot of flashbacks. And when we ultimately got to the hidden town, a hidden village on the other side of the secret of the magic. Once we got to Tao Lo, the narrative was we wait for the bad guys to show up and we prepare. And I feel like that movie started kind of grinding to a halt. And you also have the villain, the monster on the other side of the wall, not being as personally the dweller of the darkness, not as personally connected to any of the characters. He's a kind of this like abstract evil until he bursts free. And I feel like once the father-son stuff is resolved in the movie, and it's tragic, we do kind of just have a lot of CGI, and it's feeling like, okay, let's wrap this up with a bow, because this is just big and it's a lot of CGI, and let's get back to what this movie was doing really well, which was the stunt work and the character stuff. And so that's where things started kind of going away for me, and I was like, okay, let's wrap this movie up. It does wrap up, though.
And I'm not going to argue against your feelings there, but what I will say, and this movie so deeply embraced Chinese mythology, and in particular when you start getting into that creature stuff was integral to Chinese mythology. Mm-hmm. This movie had 18% Asian audience, but double from any other Marvel movie. Mm-hmm. Okay, and I mean, like the most was ever 9%. Yeah. Right. I mean, and of course, and people comparing Black Panther, embracing, to audiences that are, to minorities. And I mean, I think it's great that did that. And that's just it in every way. As I referenced already, the fight scenes are more of that China, I mean, the most popular, movie like this that, is known to Westerners would be like Crouching Tiger, right? Like
or
just that style.
Big Trouble in Little China has a lot of the fantasy zoo warrior elements too.
Sure, exactly. But I'm saying, like, just from that, which you could have had anywhere, but once you to have fully gone into a full-on Chinese mythology creatures, left and right, every time you turn around. So yes, I agree with you. Suddenly it's this giant CGI extravaganza, but not something you've ever seen before. And for a Western movie to embrace and do that, I mean, they did right by this character. They did right by that section of the global audience. And listen, and as a Westerner, I love that they did that, and I enjoyed it, so fully, because it should be that
momentum shift being what it is. Because I felt the movie slow down when they got to the village. That being said, do I want to see this movie again? I really do. I do want to see this movie again. And Chris Graves is watching.
Maybe we'll go, because I would.
And Chris says, I think the momentum shift was great. It allowed the Asian characters to move just beyond action. And I actually really do agree with that.
Valid point.
I agree with that, Chris. And
it added some heart to the movie. And the movie had heart throughout, but really it needed to slow down a little bit, so it just wasn't, it was more than an action film.
Dr. Merkin over on YouTube says, I loved the movie and I haven't experienced that kind of reaction from the entire packed cinema in a long time. It's a fun movie. I still like working over my head. I said, do we need it? Did we need that many flashbacks? Did we need that giant exposition sequence? Because there's a giant exposition sequence that Tony Leung gives where they're testing the water, and that's cool. They're putting the gems into the dragon's eyes, and there's a lot of stuff going on in that compound that's expositional. And then when they get to the village with the wood carving, there's a lot of exposition. And I'm like, I don't know how else to tell this. And the Dweller of the Darkness, I don't know how to establish the Dweller of the Darkness as a real threat earlier, so that the audience is like, don't open that fucking gate. It's all going to go to hell if you open that gate. Please don't open the gate. Well, a part of me kind of wished that the father had merged with that character, so that in taking the Dweller in the Darkness down, he would have had to take his father down.
Look, I think the only way to have done that, and I think it would seriously have stepped away from Shang-Chi as a character, but in my mind, if this had been a comic book story, just where they wouldn't be worried about the pacing exactly the same way, I think you probably would have seen Tao Lo, and you would have seen his mother, and you would have gotten all the background, and you would have seen her there, so
you would have seen them seal the dragon. Yes.
Probably seal the dragon, Dweller in the Darkness.
Right. Not the dragon, yeah.
You would have seen, what that tradition is and what that's about. So that would have been a way to do it, less expository, but it would have taken a lot more time.
Sure.
The movie, and I'd argue would have slowed the movie down even more. That's the point of the exposition, is to just give you some information, right? That's exactly what exposition is, instead of having to show it all. So, I love the movie. I see your point. To me, that would be the answer for how you would have done differently. Would it have been a better movie? Not necessarily.
Ian, did you want Fin Fang Foom to make an appearance?
I did. I was. Listen, I kept hoping we'd get Fin Fang Foom, and here's the thing. So I love the movie, and I by asking that question, you're sort of pulling me a little bit into the after credit sequences, which we're of course going to talk about.
We will.
Because essentially, as I said already, I gave the background on the McLuhan rings, and we walk out of this movie, we don't know what the rings are.
We don't. And that is A-okay.
Yeah.
I'm okay with it, because there will be more movies, and I'm excited to see those movies.
So, all right. So, fine. Let's jump into at least one aspect of the mid-credit scene.
Well, before we get to the mid-credit scenes, did we wrap up what we wanted to say about how awesome the actual, like, Ben Kingsley cameo, not really a cameo, but his appearance
a little bit. We didn't talk about Morris.
Like, when Morris showed up, I was like, yeah, I think you ordered a stuffed animal Morris immediately. And when you told me you had ordered it, I asked for the link because I ordered myself a Morris.
My stepson, middle of the movie, looked at me like, oh my God, I have to have that. Like, literally, he came on the screen, was like, I don't know what that is, but I have to have it.
Yeah, Ian and I both, within 20 minutes of each other, ordered Morris's off of the Disney store. Yep. we're men in our 40s ordering Morris's off of the Disney store, and you know what? You squeeze the foot and the wings flap. I'm totally excited for this.
The one problem with me with my stepson is that I don't even get to pretend it's mine. It's his. That's it, but it's in the house.
It's in the house, man.
So, same thing happened. Every Grogu I've bought, they're his,
So I mean, I just want to say with the Ben Kingsley stuff, I thought that was so refreshing because I think that the treatment of the Mandarin, and yes, Tony Leung says it. He says, yes, they hired an actor and he was a buffoon and they made him act like a terrorist. And I felt like that was the addressing of Iron Man 3 that we were going to get.
Right.
And when we see Ben Kingsley in that room locked up, and the Morris stuff, and the fact that he is now part of the entourage, and he is part of this adventure.
He's the court jester, and it's literally like he can't go anywhere, but he's actually weirdly happy because what was his life otherwise?
I was like, this is so brilliant.
Yeah.
I was so blown away by the fact that they had retcon / fixed something that to a lot of fans was a missing part of the canon, and here we had a brilliant solution for it, and I hope it pays dividends going forward. I hope we see more of Ben Kingsley's character and Tao Lo and all of this. I loved it. I thought it was really, really smart. And you know what? We even got some real low level Iron Man and Shang-Chi characters like Razor Fist showing up, and I was like, "Oh, Razor Fist was treated pretty well."
Razor Fist is an original Shang-Chi character,
right?
Yeah, he's around. He's one of those bad guys for a long time.
But he's got two swords in the comics for hands, and I don't know how.
Not originally,
right?
Originally, he had one, and then he lost. And then he lost the other one. Yeah, so
and now he can't wipe his own ass.
Right, basically,
he's got swords for hands.
Yeah, and listen, and they handled him great. So a lot of great call outs that they did. Something that the MCU, that Kevin Feige does such a great job of is even where they divert, those Easter eggs are there. There's references to things, or they just pull from the mythology. Like, listen, when it became very clear, when this movie was being made, okay, they're going to make the quote unquote Mandarin his father. I said, you know what? That's a brilliant, way of bringing some things together. Because as I was saying before, it wasn't going to be Fu Manchu or whatever, Lao Tzu, whatever they were going to call him, So great. Do that. The Mandarin is, a Chinese character. Why not merge the two concepts? And I think it worked absolutely beautifully.
Absolutely. And it doesn't negate the terrorist organization that you saw in Iron Man 1.
Not at all.
At all.
Not at all. So that's great. I thought that the choice with the sister to make it a fight ring was interesting. In the comics, he did have a sister like that who had the golden daggers. She was straight up a rival criminal organization to her father's. But that informs the second tag.
Right.
And by the way, the fight scene, I mean, so many great Easter eggs in there to see, like the extremist guy fighting a Black Widow.
Okay. So this is where I wanted to be sitting next to Ian in the movies, is because you're walking through that scene where they're seeing all the different fights. And what were some of those Easter eggs that you?
So like when you see someone like flaring up with like the red stuff, that's an indicator of extremis from Iron Man 3.
Sure.
So it's a superhuman, because he has extremis in him. There was someone, a female combatant that was a Black Widow.
Mm-hmm.
So there was that. I mean, obviously the Abomination. And can we just talk about how the Abomination has evolved and now he's pretty much straight out of the comics with the ears?
Yeah. This looks like the Abomination from the comics, and we have ourselves the Dark Avengers Hulk now, because he's very Hulk.
Yeah. And Wong looked like he put him back in the raft.
Okay. So when he opens up the spinny gate,
he's putting him back in the raft. So,
and you could tell it was the raft in the background of what it looked like and so on. I wasn't paying that much attention to what was on the other side of the spinny. My head was spinning. I was like, after seeing the Eternals trailer, I'm like, Wong's the new Nick Fury. He's in everything.
Well, okay, so now let's get into something. So as I said, they didn't tell us where the rings came from, but they said that it was a beacon in So, and just from the Eternals trailer, we see that the Celestials are coming. So the question is, are they? We've been told, well, they're a lot older than 1,000 years, and we've been told in the Eternals trailer that they've been there for 7,000 years.
Yes.
So the question is, are the rings in some way related to the Celestials, and did they send out the beacon and call them? I mean, my gut reaction is, wow, we really gonna get the answer to that quickly. But you know what? I mean, basically the way they do these movies, and I've read so many different, interviews with every director, they always say the same thing. We work on the Marvel stuff, and they're all, in the same offices, and they meet in the halls, and you're working on this, I'm working on that, and they come up with this little connective tissue. And that's what they do. They make their own movie. They go like, oh, why don't you just throw this line in, and that'll work for this. That's what they do. And I mean, so it does make a lot of sense that we might get that answer right then and there. I'd certainly be surprised if Shang-Chi shows up in that movie, but have you heard, is Wong showing up in Eternals?
Yes, he's in the trailer.
Oh, did I miss that? I missed Wong.
Yeah, Ian Wong is very much in the trailer. Okay. He's in several shots, and in the most recent trailer, Wong is in multiple shots of the Eternals trailer. He's clearly not one of the Eternals, but when I watched that mid-credit scene, and I saw Dr. Banner and Captain Marvel, and they were saying it's a beacon, I immediately thought about what you're hearing from that most recent Eternals trailer, where you see the approach of a live Celestial on to Earth, and I was like, oh, it answered the call, and the call was woken by the blip or whatever it was.
Well, that's the question, right?
Yeah, and so you see these rings, and I'm like, okay, if they have celestial origin, let's get it. It's cool. That makes sense. And I don't mind that we're going to get that answer in November. I thought it was something to do with Eternals, because the only other thing that a fanboy like me was thinking was, I am always making everything relate to Fantastic Four. It's probably not Fantastic Four. I'm thinking it's Eternals. But yeah, watch that news.
Well, that's just it. Because
watch that.
It could have been Galactus, but it's not Galactus yet.
Yeah, go ahead and watch that new Eternals trailer, and Wong is very much in that trailer.
Well, and here's the thing. I mean, I love that because
he's at the dinner scene. Remember the dinner scene that was in an earlier trailer? At the end, it culminated in a dinner scene.
Yes.
Wong is at that table.
Okay. I probably watched that trailer on my phone.
How dare you, sir?
Well,
filmmakers everywhere are gasping at you like, we cannot believe you disrespect our art form like that.
So anyway, with the trailer, man. But what I love about that is, and in particular, like, you reference, every single individual character Marvel movie, or, the best example I think is, is from the other universe, is like Aquaman. And you go like, well, where the hell is Superman when all this is going on? Mm-hmm. Right. So sure. I love the idea that, what we saw in Doctor Strange, this idea that, it's more than just strange. They're all, around to, combat these incursions and things like, yeah, they should be showing up when something like that's going on. Right. Yeah. So I love that.
That being said, Tao Lo felt so removed and difficult to get to.
Well, Tao Lo's a different universe, right?
Right. It's that, like, they, in going through the bamboo forest, the shifting maze, they were accessing a different dimension, a different universe. Right.
So here's the thing.
So Doctor Strange can't just show up. Like, Thor can't just show up and solve it.
Not a Tao Lo.
Right. Exactly.
Right. No, in this movie, I didn't have that issue.
Real quick, Chris Graves on Facebook says, would you guys like to see a what if with Shang-Chi? Of course.
Depends on what the story is.
Depends on what the story is. When what if culminates, Ian, we're going to be right here on this podcast talking about these individual 8 or 9 episodes, or however many there are, of what if.
We are, because here's the thing. We haven't gotten it yet, but these are not one-offs.
No.
What you would normally expect. As a comic, what if has always been one-offs?
Sure.
One-offs, and that's not, they are building to something that I feel pretty confident is actually going to come back into what they're doing with everything else. To wit, a version of the more recent Secret War.
That's what we've been talking
with Incursion and all that. Yeah,
a little bit. We've been saying that a little bit in the main Geekscape show, the weekly show, and I've just been, the other thing that we've been saying is, didn't what ifs, like, everybody always die at the end of the episode? So I did find the last episode the most satisfying as a what if story compared to the comics, where it was like, at the end of it, it's like, oh yeah, Spider-Man ends up on the X-Men, and because he does, everyone dies. Like, that was always the story. Right. And what if was like, oh yeah, there's actually a Fantastic Five, and because there are, everyone dies. The end. So
They
Ian,
were very much here's the thing you always wanted. Guess what? Things are much better the way they are.
Yeah, you know what? Like, I know these characters have gone through hell, but you be thankful they are, because otherwise Galactus eats everybody and they die.
Right.
We've got this mid-credit scene we've been talking about. Shout out to the Back to the Future.
What do you mean?
Wong basically shows up and goes, Marty, you got to come to with me. That was
kind of that.
I was like, y'all are back to futuring this mid-credit scene heavy.
But you know what? Even so, it's so great that they're sitting there. And I mean, normally, the typical comic thing, movie, whatever, it's a superhero thing, you keep everything to yourself. They're like, next thing you know, this just happened. They're at a bar with their friend, just casually tell them everything. They don't have any reason to keep it to themselves.
There's no secret.
It's like, hey, and then this happens, and they're like, they sound so crazy.
And the friends don't believe them until Wong shows up.
Right.
Wong is the modern Nick Fury. He's the connective tissue going forward right now.
I thought, and it's hysterical, and I love just the statement, like, great, now it's a roller coaster. This is your life now, And by the way, what a shock! You would expect in any other movie, the Katie character is just fine. She's a psychic, whatever. Like, no, she's fully in it, and now she's shooting mystical arrows, and she's gonna be, she's gonna keep on going, And
she's a character from the book.
I don't think so.
No, I didn't think so either. The Awkwafina character, I didn't think it was established in the book. I knew the sister was, I knew the father was.
I've never known Shang-Chi to have like the psychic. I mean, listen, they've done a very different thing. Just him having, the rings is Shang-Chi's a martial artist. That's it.
Yeah. He never had any supernatural tools or powers. He just knew how to kick some ass.
Right. But I'm good with it. I think it's cool.
I do too. And I like the fantastic element to it. My pacing issues be damned. It doesn't matter. The movie is good. People had fun.
That was the thing, because I felt like Shang-Chi was immediately and intuitively doing more with the rings than his father ever did. And I was expecting or wondering if there wouldn't be a Tao Lo connection with the rings. So when there wasn't, that sort of surprised me somewhat.
Like it could access Tao Lo easily, or it was a gateway, or they
just that the fact that, because his mother came from there, or at least was raised there. I mean, presumably, we don't have a sense necessarily that they're not humans that are just there, right?
Sure.
So, there's definitely some questions that I wish we'd get answered, more about Tao Lo.
Okay.
Look, in the comics, Tao Lo makes one appearance in like an issue of Thor. It's not related to Shang-Chi. And essentially, Tao Lo is where the Chinese mythology comes from. Because in the comics, in Marvel Comics, every mythology pantheon exists. And they're all essentially, without saying it, that extra dimensional alien thing. They've been preyed to by this culture, that culture. You have Chinese mythology, you have Greek Roman mythology, you have Norse mythology, you have Egyptian mythology. If there's a mythology, they exist in Marvel Comics. Mm-hmm. Right?
And they're characters. Like you have Native American mythology, you have South American mythology.
They show up one way or another. Yeah,
absolutely. And
those beings always exist.
And they're connected to each other. They're branches on the world tree, or they're this and that, and they're all together.
Now, in early rumors on Eternals, it seemed like the Eternals, they did something interesting. I don't know why Kirby did this when he created them, but for whatever reason, they decided to say there were certain analogs between them and the Greek gods. And so that sometimes things that Eternals did were attributed to Greek gods, and and vice versa, that kind of thing.
And the names of the Eternals,
right? Well, Zuras and Zeus, and Athena and Athena. And I think early on the rumor was that we were going to have Hercules as an Eternal, but it's not Hercules; it's Gilgamesh.
Right.
So, but again, the whole confusing or attributing acts. So. I wonder if they'll bother addressing that. Maybe it'll be a throwaway line, because I just at this point I doubt they're going to bother just doing a whole other line of it. And here are the Greek gods, your whole other set of aliens or what have you.
I could see Hercules appearing in a future Avengers or a future Thor or a future spinoff. But yes,
well, but here's the thing: is my understanding is we're getting Zeus in the next Thor.
Okay, let's have it.
So we'll see. So we'll see how they do that and how they deal with that.
So, Ian, I want to talk to you a little bit more about future Shang-Chi storylines. But first, that second, the end credit sequence Book of Boba Fett. Didn't it remind you of the Book of Boba Fett?
Well,
tag?
Yes and no. So here's what's interesting, because the movie ends. It says the 10 rings will return,
Right.
and of course the question is, the 10 rings the Shang-Chi has, or the 10 rings as an organization? Well, it means both, right?
Yeah. Well,
so
the 10 Rings organization is clearly what they're talking about there, and I joked the Book of Boba Fett because it reminded me so much of the end, the tag on Mandalorian of Boba Fett sitting down and being like, "Oh, here's a pullout. We're gonna kick some ass." Right. Book of Boba Fett.
So the question is that set up for a second Shang-Chi movie, or is they just saying we're going to see this organization appear in other things? I mean, look, to me, it makes total sense. The Captain America movie we're getting, they could show up there. You know what I mean?
That was my first thought, was that Sam Wilson would, in the same way that we saw a lot of that in Falcon and Winter Soldier, we're going to end up seeing the 10 Rings as a criminal organization. We now have Madripoor. You don't think the 10 Rings has a presence in Madripoor?
They could show up in Hawkeye. I mean, there's so many places that they could possibly show up. You know? So, I mean, Moon Knight. I mean, there's a million places they can show up.
I like the idea of Moon Knight.
Yeah. Just saying that, they can show up in anywhere and in anything. They basically exist. They're a terrorist organization, but we don't know how she's going to use them, or they're assassins, or they're whatever she wants them to be.
So, Ian, looking forward, one thing that I did read a lot of over the weekend was people dunking on Danny Rand and Iron Fist and saying, well, now we don't need that trash character anymore. And I just kept thinking, not a trash character. And I think the big problem with people had with Iron Fist was he was introduced first. And Iron Fist is still a pretty legitimate Marvel character, and he still has a place with Shang-Chi in the universe.
I'll tell you, I remember watching that first season of Iron Fist and the second season, and the entire time thinking, I expected to get the Shang-Chi intro there, right? There were rumors that would happen. I don't have any issue with it first or second or whatever. The shame of it is that, talk about the most improved show ever from season 1 to season 2 of that show. And season 3, I thought, was setting up, what I really want to see is the 7 Deadly Kingdoms. The 7 Heavenly Cities, excuse me. And that whole tournament. Yeah. So, and, I mean, look, you can argue at this point that seeing a Tao Lo, does it just seem more of the same to do more other dimensional cities and all that? But I mean, I think it's very different.
I thought that the introduction of Tao Lo, that has a ton of fantastical elements. I mean, there are little lions and dragons running around. It's very different than what we've seen of Kunlun. I think, if anything, the presence of Tao Lo now is now you could absolutely do the tournament of the 7 kingdoms. That's one of the kingdoms.
Yeah, the frustrating thing is we just have no idea how they're going to deal with the Netflix characters, right? We believe Charlie Cox is showing up in Spider-Man No Way Home. We'll know soon. It's 3 months away. Seemingly, maybe he's just Peter's lawyer, but good enough. Good enough. If it's blind Matt Murdock in it, it's Daredevil, right? So that's a start. Whether or not they reference. I mean, here the bottom line is this: they can never say a word about what happened on the show. It doesn't matter. You could pretty much assume that the show happened and great, and what's now happening is after that.
And multiverse.
If they want, and that's just it. They don't have to go against it. It's tricky. I mean, the Darkhold was a tricky thing, right? Because straight up doing the Darkhold in WandaVision after they've done the Darkhold in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is definitely okay, is Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. out or not? Does it no longer count or not?
But that was one thing looking at the What If episode from a few weeks ago. You were definitely putting Coulson and S.H.I.E.L.D. in the events of Thor back into the limelight of the MCU.
Well, Coulson was definitely around. I mean, Coulson dying in Avengers, there's no question. The question is, whether or not him then being brought back to life through Tahiti and all of that, in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. happened.
It did. In my heart, it did.
I love that show.
Yep.
And it's great stuff. And listen, and the crossover stuff they did on that show, I mean, it only fell apart at the end because the different sides of Marvel at that time didn't talk. So they weren't able to see what Endgame was going to be. So they just said, all right, screw it, because they were fully crossing over and lining up, right up through to Infinity War,
Mhm.
and then that last season, they just didn't know what to do with it.
Right. The time travel season, which is still,
yeah,
it still left the
great.
door wide open.
Sure.
That this stuff is still out there.
Sure. But they avoided dealing with, what happened with the blip.
This whole, I mean, if anything, I saw that the Tao Lo stuff was yet another one of those seven kingdoms. Kunlun is still there. It's different. Kunlun is pretty different.
Well, bottom line is that doesn't even have to be one of them. It's just something different.
And now here we go.
And see, here's the tricky thing. We talk about the multiverse more from a what if standpoint, right? But does multiverse in those terms and extra dimensional, are they the same thing or not, right? Like, we're told in Loki that all the branches have been snipped, but that doesn't mean that Doctor Strange isn't dealing with other dimensional things, like when he's dealing with Dormammu. It doesn't mean that Ant-Man, and the Avengers aren't accessing the quantum verse. So that's an interesting question, right? That isn't really dealt with. It's just the time branch aspect of multiversal existence was being snipped.
A temporal version, not a lateral version. Is that what you're saying?
Sort of, but it's not necessarily about temporal, because, recognize that from the viewpoint of beings like Kang or Immortus, or, whatever you want to call them, right? The time aspect doesn't really matter, because, basically, as he says, the second, they're not snipping anymore, the new multiversal things are happening, but they're not happening in that moment, wherever they are, presumably at the end of time. They're happening at all points in time.
Right.
Because, and that's why you can have things like a lizard Loki or things like that, because whatever branch led to beings that are basically a lizard Loki probably happened a million years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, but my point is that, from Doctor Strange alone, you clearly still have multiversal aspects, So the Dweller in Darkness, I know, you felt like we didn't get much on that, but listen, we know from Doctor Strange that there are other dimensional entities and they have power. And in fact, in Doctor Strange, we see that some beings get power from them, which is such a straight out acknowledgement of the way Doctor Strange and the spells always worked. The Crimson Bands of Sidorak it's borrowing power from Sidorak.
From a demon.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, I love that. Everyone was hoping in WandaVision that we'd get Mephisto. My feeling was Dormammu made more sense. I mean, if you just look at the plot of the whole Doctor Strange movie, with was it Caecilius, whatever his name is, right? I mean, that's the whole point. He's getting power from Dormammu. It's such a, Mephistophelian, agreement, right?
I know.
I say it that way instead of Faustian, but But so I'm still wondering if we're not still building to Dormammu. We know that the Scarlet Witch is studying the Darkhold.
Right.
That's supposed to be related to Dormammu. Right? So I'm still wondering that. And that's the thing. So anytime we think, maybe Mephisto, here's the question, and people are speculating. Could Doctor Strange really be that stupid as we're seeing him act in the No Way Home trailer?
I think he has a level of vanity that would make it. I think
maybe.
If we're going to talk about that No Way Home trailer, I do think that's Doctor Strange.
That's the question. It's a callback to Doctor Strange at the beginning of the Doctor Strange movie, right?
Yeah,
vanity, but ego, maybe.
He's got a soft spot for Peter. Everybody's got a soft spot for Peter.
Sure.
And I do think that level of vanity can still be accessed.
Yeah.
And you've seen it in the comics still. You still see it in the comics, and Doctor Strange's been a character for over 40 years. I don't think the vanity's ever left him.
As you know, I don't see them jumping to Mephisto anytime soon. I just don't see that happening.
Agreed. I think that is Stephen Strange in Far From Home. No Way Home. I think that's Stephen Strange.
Yeah, maybe.
All right. I've said that I think the next Shang-Chi movie that I want to see is a tournament movie. It's got Iron Fist in it. It's got
I'd
multiple
love that.
badasses in it. I'd love to see that movie. What would you like to see going forward?
So your thinking is really that they utilize the Shang-Chi franchise to do some form of adaptation of the tournament, that's from the best Iron Fist run, that Fraction run.
And bring Iron Fist into it.
The seven-headed Lucidus, yeah. I love that idea. I think that's a great idea. Because there isn't a definitive Shang-Chi story that you're definitely looking for. Currently in the comics, they've gone to this place, it's brand new in the mythology, that his father had these different houses, which basically based on different styles of fighting, which frankly sort of borrowed a bit from something that they did in Green Arrow in the comics, a lot sooner. But I liked it. And then the idea is that Shang-Chi is actually the head of the house. So now he's sort of, unfortunately, been pulled into this criminal organization, and he wants to do good with it, but he's being positioned against some heroes, in his efforts.
I could see the sister having that storyline.
Well, yeah. I mean, what they've done is they've introduced other siblings that he never knew about.
I remember
at each house. So, and I like it. I think that's really interesting, cool. And by the way, I mean, there's no reason that, what we're told in the movie is, he fell in love and she was like this match that changed him and he had the kids. Doesn't mean he doesn't have other kids or the descendants or whatever else. Doesn't mean
he's been around for 1,000 years.
1,000 years, exactly.
1,000 years.
So, yeah.
Shang-Chi definitely has some cousins hanging around.
You would think. Nephews, nieces, great-grand nephews, nieces, great-great.
Could be related to Morris if things got weird.
Well, yeah, who knows? so yeah, that's that's definitely possible. We'll see.
Well, Ian, any closing thoughts on this one? We got more Marvel stuff.
See it. It's great. It's beautiful. It's fun. Honestly, one of the things I loved about that mid-credit sequence is you usually feel like, okay, because there was so much of a thing about, in the beginning and them finding their way and, they do the irresponsible thing, they go drinking and they're still the same people. Like, yeah, karaoke, let's go out and have fun. And by the way, didn't that sort of feel, in a different way, but it felt to me very reminiscent of the end credit sequence in Avengers. Like, let's go for shawarma, It's like real people, real lives, doing real things,
That was fun.
Very relatable. I thought it was great.
On the main show, I was telling the story of how I had to do that emergency trip up to San Francisco to do the directing in 36 hours. They put me up at the Fairmont. I'm watching Shang-Chi. They're parking cars at the Fairmont. And I was like 4 days, I just stayed at that hotel. If I'd had a car, Awkwafina and Shang-Chi would have been joyriding in it. But it was pretty cool to see. That was pretty fresh in my head. And it was fun to be able to elbow Heidi and be like, that's the hotel I stayed in that you did not come on the trip for. Sorry about that. It's pretty posh. Ian, dude, what's the next thing we got to talk about? Like, because we got What If.
What If?
How many episodes of What If?
9, I believe.
9 episodes. So that'll probably wrap up right before Eternals. We've got Eternals. Yeah. We've got No Way Home.
Yeah.
Is there a DC offering on the horizon? Like what? There? Oh,
I don't think we have a DC offer for a bit. But you're leaving something out.
I'm leaving out Dune, aren't I?
No, well, you're leaving out Dune, but you're leaving out the funny thing.
Talk to me, buddy. I'm blanking hard.
Let There Be Carnage.
Yes, which thanks to the success of Shang-Chi just moved up 2 weeks to the October 1st weekend. So you got Ian, get tickets. As they say here on Geekscape, Ian, get tickets.
I mean,
there will be carnage.
Listen, we did the first one. We tore it apart. I expect this one. I hear it's worse.
Wait, but you hear this new one is worse?
Yeah, and I actually said something. How could it be worse? And the answer was, well, you have a less competent director.
No, I like Andy Serkis.
I love Andy Serkis, but I don't know that he has experience doing it. That's just what I was told.
No.
I haven't seen it yet. We'll see.
Andy, I still remember when Andy Serkis came by the Geekscape booth at Comic-Con, and we had a nice chat. He had his kids with him. Andy, I have nothing, and I thought that his experience with mocap and this and that was going to be able to give some pretty fun performances.
I guess we'll see.
No. Listen, I'm drawing the line right now. And if disappointment meets me, then so be it.
All right.
I want to believe that we will all be wrong with There Will Be Carnage.
You're going to be saying the line. I'm sorry about Venom.
I want to be wrong. I will listen. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I want to believe that I will be pleasantly surprised by Venom 2, and it will be a fun time. I'm convincing. Am I convincing myself? Am I sounding convincing?
Here's the thing. I have no doubt we'll have fun watching that movie.
Damn.
I think we'll have a great time. I mean, listen, didn't we have fun watching The Spirit?
We did, but at the expense of time that we're going to want back on our deathbed. But yeah, we did.
We laughed. We cried.
Oh, man. Okay.
We asked the producer for our money back.
We did. We directly asked the producer for their money back, and we continue to this day, 10 plus years later. Okay. There will be Venom October 1st weekend. We're coming for you. Oh boy. Geekscapists, subscribe to this podcast on any podcatcher you have access to. Share it with your friends, because if Ian and I are going to go in and watch Venom 2, we don't want to do it alone. We want y'all to be alongside for that ride. So subscribe and share this with your friends. Geekscape's available on all major podcatchers, totally free. And of course, we're here having regular episodes on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook. Closing thoughts is Shang-Chi, totally worth it. A lot of fun.
Great fun. And by the way, I also want to say, so happy to see it's doing so well. I mean, particularly in this, in the environment with COVID and everything. But huge 90 million plus, holiday weekend. Once again, I know people specifically betting against Marvel, I mean, the same thing. I back with, Guardians of the Galaxy. I remember thinking, I know I'm going to see this movie and I'm excited for it, but are other people? But, they launch. And it's a good movie. It's a really good movie.
All right, Geekscapists. For Ian Kerner, I'm Jonathan London, and we'll see you next time. Geekscape forever. Peace.